All right, hello everyone. Welcome to Toolkit Tuesdays. Hopefully, I got the chance to say a hello to you. I know we were messing with Zoom at the beginning. What a way to launch the new show. Um, I want to respect your time, so we're just going to jump right into the presentation. My name is Jimmy. I'm thrilled to have you all here today. Before we get started, I have some housekeeping things I want to go over real quick. This is being recorded. I'm going to put it on YouTube. I'll post the link in the chat so you guys can look at it later or share. Feel free to ask questions in the chat. I'll try to get to them at the end. We'll have a Q&A segment there. And if I don't get to your question, just send me an email. I'll send my contact information in the chat as well. So you can text me or email me your question. I'll get back to you either later today or sometime this week, depending on how involved my answer is to your question. And if you do find today useful, please share. And I would really appreciate that. So because this is our first session, I thought it was important to note that although it's not imperative that these sessions be attended in order, that they will definitely have some stackable features, right? So meaning I will refer to these early sessions later on in the series as we go. And because it's our first session, I want to throw a little bit of groundwork out there. And we're going to start off with this exercise right here. So to conserve time, we're going to kind of ignore Stuart, but I want you to think about this for you and maybe a couple other people that you're working with, maybe in your immediate vicinity, whether it's people you lead or people leading you or just you yourself, right? But definitely you yourself. Think about you. But let me give you my example with Joe first. So Joe is our local mechanic. He is our guru when it comes to cars, right? He's like the guy. If you tell him what color your car is, he can tell you exactly what's wrong with it, and he can fix. He's like the whisperer of motors, right? He can take a motor inside out and put it back together, blindfolded, all that stuff. He is the wrench man's wrench man. Now, on a scale of 1 to 10, we've given him a 9, indicating his capability to do his job, right? He's very good. So a lot of times what ends up happening is people will take a guy like Joe and put him in charge of the shop because he's the best mechanic we have. He's been doing it the longest. He's the best at it. He knows cars inside and out. So he occupies a leadership position. But that doesn't transfer as you look over at his other number, right? That doesn't transfer to his capability to actually lead people. Now, this may not necessarily be Joe's fault. Joe may not have had any development in this realm whatsoever, and that's most likely the case. Very rarely is it the case that he would be rated a 2 because he's been developed but was resistant to it, right? Most likely what ends up happening is he just wasn't developed, and he's put in this leadership position solely based on his hard skill. Well, we need to separate that concept. We need to look at performing versus leading performers as two completely different skill sets. And then if you're not intentionally developing that number, if you're not doing anything about that number over there, if you're not learning and developing, then we are going to be hurting the people that we lead. All right. And that includes ourselves, right? Because we're at least responsible for leading ourselves. So if we're not very good at leading ourselves and we're not doing anything about that, we're just going to continue to have the same reality. Okay, so now I want you to think about you in that same example. I want you to look at how you're performing. How good are you at your job? Maybe you're new. Give yourself some slack there, right? But for sure, you're probably working on getting better at your job, right? The kind of people that attend sessions like this aren't the kind of people who just are mediocre at work, right? They usually have some sort of thirst and hunger, and they want what's next. So now think about that from the perspective of other people around you. So you rate yourself on how well you do your job. How would your boss rate you if you have one? Or how would your subordinates rate you if they have them? If you're leading at home, how would your kids rate you, right? If you're a husband, how would your wife rate you? Or vice versa, right? If you're a pastor of a church, how would your flock actually rate you? Sure, you can preach real well, right? So we'll give you like an 8 or 9 or maybe a 10. You're the best preacher we've ever had. But then what about leading? How well are you at the leading piece, right? So think about that from your perspective and from the other people in your lives' perspective. How well are you doing? And give yourself a number and revisit this tool. and make sure that you're working on that number. So that's a little bit of groundwork. And we need to understand a couple of concepts. Well, today's concept overall, right? And it's supported by a couple of facts that we're going to talk about. Fact number one, you can't give what you don't possess, right? Or another way to say that is you can only give what you do possess, right? So if what you possess is chaos, then that's what you're going to give. If what you possess is an accidental way of going about things, then that is what you're going to give. So what I want you to think about in this context today is a process. Do you have a process? If you don't have a process, that's what you're giving to the people that you lead is accident, right? Accidental way of going about things. So before we ask others to follow us, we need to be worth following. And if we want to be worth following, we need to have a process. We're not just going to accidentally make it to the top of the mountain, right? So that's fact number one. Fact number two, we never graduate from the school of self-improvement. It's never ending. You never really truly reach the summit of that mountain. And it's really important here, and I always bring this part up because this is where we get to talk about my favorite characteristic of all in a leader, and that's humility. We've got to crush that ego. We have to get away from the thought that because we occupy a leadership position, we somehow inherited all the knowledge that goes with that leadership position, right? There's almost this pressure that you have to have all the answers. So we need to get away from that. We need to get comfortable being vulnerable and transparent with this process. And this is how we achieve approachability, by the way. This is how we grow in our emotional intelligence. This is how we get loyalty and alignment. This is how we get people to understand that we're on the journey with them. We're not just standing on top of the mountain screaming down at them, trying to figure out how they're not up there with you yet, or why they haven't reached the ledge you need them to reach, or the whatever, right? We're climbing too. And we're just right there along with them on this journey. And they're going to travel with you if they know that and they see that. So before we get to the tool of the day, I want to present the results of a scenario that ties into this quite a bit. And this is a scenario that I've been presenting to people, individuals and groups for at least a couple of years now. So at this point, I've gathered about hundreds, right, in the hundreds when it comes to data and responses. So here's the scenario. You're getting ready to go on a date, or if that doesn't apply to you, you're getting ready to go to a really important interview. And the question is that I would pose is, what tools would you use to prepare your physical appearance? And I usually give them an example, right? So as a bald guy, I always start off like, I like to walk out the door to an event like this. I would like to have a freshly shaved head. So I would use a razor, right? Then the responses start pouring in. Oh, hairbrush or curling iron, lipstick, beard oil, right? I've heard all kinds of stuff. And out of these hundreds of responses, only 2 people ever mentioned the mirror. Now, based on my conclusions, it's because the mirror is an automatic assumption that it's going to be a part of this process, right? You can't really check your external appearance to know what to do, what tool to use, but the mirror gets kind of lost in the fact that it's a tool itself, right? But it's a part of this process. And mirrors are such a common part of our lives, right? So you buy a house these days and there's mirrors already in the house. You buy a vehicle, you got vanity mirrors. You got apps on your phone. There's just mirrors everywhere, right? And going back to the date scenario, if you're out on that date and you're having the steak and you're having the broccoli and you're eating that sweet potato and you go to the restroom, you're going to look in the mirror and you're going to check yourself. Do I have broccoli in my teeth? Do I have steak in my teeth? Oh, and if I do, by the way, I'm going to reach for a tool to fix that because I understand this process. I look in a mirror, I see something that needs to be changed or fixed. I grab a tool to fix it. I fix it. Boom. It's socially acceptable. In fact, it's almost socially unacceptable to not adopt that mindset, right? We have section upon section at Walmart. We have industries tied to this outer experience of ours. from wardrobe to skincare. You could get plastic surgery, right, if you really wanted to. So the process exists externally. Now, how nice would it be to have that same process internally and have it be that acceptable and that clear, right? So wouldn't it be nice to have mirrors to see what's on the other side of us, to see what it's like to be on the other side of us, to see our reflection? And then not only that, but have the tools to fix those errors or flaws, things that we don't like. And then not just have those tools, but know how to use those tools. And I'll take it one step further. Get so good at using those tools that you can teach other people how to use them, right? Think about a hairbrush, right? You get, after a while, you get so many repetitions and boom, you're just using it, right? Same thing with a razor. I don't cut my head. I've been shaving my head for years, right? Had a receding hairline in my early 20s, started shaving my head and haven't nicked my head in years, right? Because I just got good at it. I've gotten unconsciously competent. I'm so good, I don't even have to think about it anymore, right? But if I were to teach, a 12, 13-year-old young man how to use a razor, I'd have to really kind of be intentional about that process. So you guys understanding this metaphor here, it's very important. So every Toolkit Tuesday, we're going to have this personal reflection. And like the slide says, right, we're not always the best judge of what it's like to be on the other side of us, right? And we can get into that scenario about, hey, does this dress make me look fat? Kind of concept when it comes to internal, right? Where you're having other people be your mirror and be your eyes and look at you, right? But we're going to stick with this scenario just at the level of depth that we are right now. And again, you see that key characteristic, humility, pops up. And you have to ask yourself with humility and all the integrity, right? What is it like to be on the other side of me? And be willing to ask the people that you lead that question. Be willing to ask your boss that question or your customers that question. What's it like to be on the other side of me? Am I approachable? Am I consistent? All these verbs. So many different ways to describe good leadership. We have some tools later on down the road that are really going to help with that verb and just kind of dissecting the different descriptions of leadership styles. But we have to ask ourselves that question. And here's why. Self-awareness is the beginning of this journey when it comes to leadership. Self-awareness is the beginning of the journey to become a leader worth following. That's it. It's the beginning. Then self-awareness tied to action is how we get people to follow us, right? When they see us identify something that needs growth, and then we grow, we are showing them the process, which is exactly what we want from them, right? So self-awareness is the beginning of the journey. Self-awareness tied to action is our first step. And that process is how we get other people to follow us. So here's our tool. The tool is called Know Yourself to Lead Yourself. And you can see up there on the title, but it's also right there in the middle, right? Know yourself to lead yourself. And we have the infinity loop. Why do we have the infinity loop? Because it never ends, right? This is a process that never, ever ends. So all of us have tendencies. We're going to start at the bottom, and then it kind of goes counterclockwise around the circle there, okay? So we're going to start with our tendencies, which all of us have. They're hardwired into us. These tendencies create patterns of behavior because they're who we are, right? A way I like to describe these tendencies is they're kind of like a reflex. So let's say there's an activating event, something happens around you, and you react. It's a reflex, right? That's a tendency. And they're just natural to who we are. And as those patterns, right, these tendencies become a pattern because if we do them over and over and over, just like a reflex, like a muscle memory, basically, right? We are often unaware of whether or not they're good or bad. They're just a part of who we are now. And even worse, sometimes we understand that they're a part of us, but we just demand acceptance of that, right? So real quick, I want to talk about a plateau problem here. So a lot of people that I've talked to, and I've done this myself, because they can tie where the tendency comes from, they have enough awareness to dig back and say, I do this because of that. They ask other people to just accept them for who they are. Now, there's nothing wrong with being accepted for who you are, especially as long as who you are is on this journey of trying to become an individual who shapes a healthy reality, right? But if you're just using the root cause of your tendency, your reflex, I do this because when I was 2, this happened. And so now it's just, I've been doing it all my life. It's just a part of who I am, right? Well, that's thought stopping. That's action stopping. That's not self awareness tied to action. That's self awareness tied to the absence of action. You've reached a plateau. You're no longer climbing, right? So be very aware right here. You'll meet people that are in this, and you may be leading people that get in this little area, and they just hit a plateau and say, "Hey, accept me for who I am," right? And now we want to fight for their highest possible good, so we're going to find a way to change that mentality. So off the plateau, I know you guys got that, but it's just a really big thought right there that I like to dive into, right? So your tendencies create patterns, and those patterns are going to impact all of your actions as a leader. And your actions all have consequences, whether they're good or bad, right? Good consequences, bad consequences, doesn't matter. And those consequences are inevitably what ends up shaping your reality, as we see on the far left here. So we just made the full loop. Now, a lot of people hang out right there in reality and complain about reality, wonder why their reality is the way that it is. Well, within the controllables, right, the things that they can control, we need to go back. And I'm going to share an example with you that hopefully kind of clears all this up if it's muddy to you right now. So what this demonstrates, this tool, right, is that the reality of the environment in which you lead is actually heavily influenced by the tendencies you have as a leader. And the more aware you become of those tendencies, right? So if you're reflecting on that all the time and you remember your tendencies, you know your tendencies, when this happens, I do this. You jot that down and you want that to change because of what it's ended. Your end result reality is something you don't enjoy, right? So the more aware you become of those tendencies, the more emotionally intelligent you become. So now you're becoming emotionally intelligent overall, not just within yourself. You're identifying with a process that helps you lead others. We haven't gotten there yet because we're just know yourself to lead yourself first, right? Because if you know yourself to lead yourself and you're getting this process down, what you're doing is you're building a process, right? That process that you can share with others. So the more self-aware you become, the more you are able to begin choosing what your action is going to be. And you start interrupting the pattern. You start developing a new pattern. So rather than just being defined by those ingrained repeating patterns, you say, nah, I know what my tendency is here, and I'm going to choose to do it different. So first and foremost, as a leader, right, this tool is a mirror. It's a mirror first. And it helps us evaluate, do I really know myself in order to lead myself most effectively? And if you know yourself and can lead yourself, you'll find what happens is the new actions you choose have consequences that are good, right? Because now you're controlling them. And of course, you want what's good. So you're going to change your reality. And your reality in the context in which you lead will become healthier and your influence will grow. Your opportunity to shape the world around you for good is going to grow. Now, here's my example for this. I like to use my daughter, right? So my daughter, when she was in middle school and high school, she would get in the truck, and right off the bat, it was, Sally, this and this problem and that problem at school. So my tendency as a man, and it still is my tendency, remember, this is a reflex, it's who I am, was to try to fix. I would try to use my experience and try to use my knowledge to help my daughter, right? And this is true of anyone. It doesn't just have to be my daughter. Anyone I care about, if they're going through something or they're suffering in some way, shape, or form, I just want to help, right? That's my instinct, my tendency, my reflex. Someone talks about a problem. If I think I know the solution, I have a tool, I just want to jump in and fix it, right? Well, what ends up happening, and that was my pattern before, I just jump in and start giving all this unsolicited advice. But so my action was I'd start given a bunch of advice. And the consequence of that is when people aren't wanting advice, they stop coming to you with their problems, right? Because they're not looking for advice. What they're looking for is for you to hear them. And some of you probably relate to this concept, right? So those consequences ended up shaping a reality with my daughter. And eventually she would just stop talking to me about her problems. And I didn't like that as a reality. I wanted my daughter to count on me and to depend on me and to think of me as a good listener. So I had to change what I was doing. And I had to realize that my tendency was to give advice and that was shaping my reality. So my tendency was still to give advice when she'd get in the truck and start complaining about Sally. But I, being aware of this process, decided to change that pattern. So what I decided to do here was be more interested in her, right? So I made an intentional focus on her character in these conversations. So what I would start listening to was this tool applied to my daughter. So she was complaining about her reality, right? Or consequences, reality, actions. Usually that's what she was talking about. But she wasn't doing that deep dive down into her tendencies. Whereas before my conversation would have been, well, stop hanging out with Sally. But that didn't help, right? I needed to figure out what her tendencies were. And I started listening to cues on my daughter's character and finding out ways to help develop her character, right? Because she would get moments of clarity, but she wasn't able to know this entire process, right? And who does? Some of you may have a version of this tool in your life right now, but is it as clear cut as this, right? It's probably not a neuro-linguistic programming tool like this one is, right? So this is a really quick tool, and it's something you can show. You can draw this on a napkin at a restaurant if you needed to show someone how easy it is to kind of take this entire process. Right now, I've taken over 20 minutes talking about it, but the reality is it doesn't take that long to teach the tool, but it does take quite a while to get good at using it. And then apprentice people that you lead with this tool, right? So your key takeaways from today. Number one, you got to be humble. You got to be transparent. You got to look in the mirror. You got to be willing to see the flaws where you're not good, right? Rate yourself on your leadership. Separate that from your profession. How am I as a leader? Take a census if you can. How am I doing as a leader? On a scale of 1 to 10, what would you give me? What can I do better, right? Be transparent that you haven't got it all figured out. So take that self-awareness that you haven't got it all figured out and tie that to some sort of action. Do something about it to get that number moving up, right? And who better to give you some ideas on how to be a better leader than the people that you're leading right now? So approach this with some humility and then tie that to some action, okay? And then through this know yourself to lead yourself, remember this tool. Remember that it's important to look in the mirror, see something you don't like, and know how to fix it. And then get so good at that tool, you can show this process to others. All right, so real quick before I jump into the Q&A, I want to remind you guys to mark your calendars for the first Tuesday of next month, which is July 2nd. And we're going to dive into another exciting leadership tool called the 100X Indicator. It's a very powerful tool. It builds on today's foundation somewhat, but it really is another great, big, huge box or concept, in and of itself that we're going to use to continue building on top of. So I'll just say that. And if you found today's session helpful at all, consider joining our deeper dive paid courses where we go beyond the basics and show the true power. So right now, I'm in these abbreviated small toolkit sessions, I'm showing you how, to use the tool. Those deep dives are when we plug the tool in, we turn it on, we gas it up, whatever the case is, and we actually show you the power of the tool and have you use it. So join me next month if you can, and share it if you can. Get some people on board. I love to see new faces, meet new people. But that's it for Toolkit Tuesdays. I'm going to jump over to Q&A, see if I got anything. Again, email me, text me if you have any questions, and I'd be happy to respond to them later on today. Thank you so much for your time. I know it's a busy middle of the day for a lot of you. I've been Jimmy. I'll see you next time.